Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think we can start. There are lots of participants, and I hope Tamás, who is my excellent colleague, the moderator. I'm the moderator, but Tamás is the host. Can help us to open this discussion. Of course. I would like to welcome you to the online event called Hungary Escalating Autocracy. Is it a great honor for me to be here and to be the host of the event together with my Hungarian MEP colleagues, Katalin Cseh, Sándor Rónai, and Márton Gyöngyösi. Please be aware of the information that this event will be recorded via Zoom. And also, I would like to ask you to switch off your microphone because it would be easier to speak. First of all, as a moderator and some kind of host, I would like to tell you, no, today I'm at home because of this excellent event. And two of my six beautiful kids are together with me. So maybe they will join us. So sorry, but I think you know very well how does it work. From the quarantine, for example. So maybe it will be noisy, but I try to give them some subjects to do without me. I would like to also welcome the MEPs, not only Hungarian MEPs who are here with us and who will be our speakers. Thank you so much, colleagues, to join us. And also welcome the members of the Hungarian Network of Academics, which is an independent organization which was formed in 2012, the time when large groups of teachers and the students went out in the streets of Budapest and occupied university buildings in order to protest the Hungarian government's public education policies. So it's 10 years ago. Lots of things happened after that. 2 years ago, the first edition of the Hungarian Turns Its Back on Europe report was coordinated and finalized by the Hungarian Network of Academics in autumn 2019 and published in January 2020. The focus of the report was on the areas of culture, education, science, and the media. And it is a result of voluntary work by more than 30 Hungarian intellectuals, academics, researchers, and journalists. The first report was presented in the European Parliament at the beginning of 2020, and I'm very proud that the second edition of the report is presented today. I don't want to tell about the second edition too much because it is not my duty, and I'm pretty sure that the members of the Hungarian Network of Academics will talk about the different fields in details. But I have to tell you that the reason why they carried on the work and created the second edition is that in the meantime, the situation in Hungary has exacerbated. The authoritarian features of the Orbán regime have been further strengthened. Dismantling of the rule of law has continued, and the government's cultural warfare was moved up a gear, and it is increasingly destructive in the domain of culture. The discussion today will focus on the undermining of the culture, education, science, and the media sectors in Hungary and the new trends in the so-called Kulturkampf of the Orbán government, and tackles topics that weren't covered in the first report, such as Orbán's authoritarian response to the COVID-19 pandemic or his gender policy. I need to be very honest, I'm very much looking forward to this event and discussion. So first of all, I would like to give the floor to dear MEP colleague Gwendoline Delbos-Corfield from the Greens from France, who is a substitute member of the Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs Committee and member of the Constitutional Affairs Committee. And as you know very well, she's a reporter on the situation in Hungary. Dear Gwendoline, thanks for being with us. The floor is yours. I hope you are here
Yes, I am. Yes. Hello.
Thank you. The floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you to you. It's good that you do organize such an event. It is very important to explore these topics. I have been rapporteur for Hungary since summer 2019, I guess what I am saying will be explained all over this event, all the long of this event, that it will be the thread of this discussion. The state of rule of law was already very bad when I became an MEP and got this report. It was already dramatic. But sadly, it has dramatically even more deteriorated since then, and neither other member states nor the Commission has been able to put a stop on this very organized, conscious, elaborated strategy of autocratization by the Hungarian government that you time, and you sort of are in this bizarre situation where you say, you know, the next step will be that, and it happens, and there's no reaction because it is very organized. So now we can, most of the time, in fact, basically imagine what will happen after. I already came for the presentation of the first report, Hungary Turns Its Back, already with the invitation of Clara, for example, and others. This report at the time had been a great help. It had given me a lot of keys and understanding. Well, it is, I don't want to say the word happy. It would be a very bizarre word to use, but I am very thankful that you are doing another one. Since then, of course, I know much more, and I have been through a lot, but at the time it had been very enlightened, and it is indeed something that is maybe sometimes under the radar because we are working more on judiciary aspects or that sort of things, and having a bit of an idea how it works on education and culture and academics is also very important. As you may know, and I will start on this, we were in an official mission of the Parliament, the first one in years and years and years, with my colleagues coming from all the other groups. We were in Hungary this autumn, and anyway, I have very regular contacts with civil society activists all the time. Sort of, I have a monthly, even bi-monthly meeting with them, so I get very aware. But the mission, of course, makes us see on the ground exactly how it is you live it. It's one thing to read it and to understand it in a very academic sort of way, and it's another thing to be in the feeling and going through it. And what I want to, first of all, really point out is the Fidesz narrative that has polarized across the years, building around us versus the others. It has been helped by the fact that they have took control of the media, the academia, and the story that I tell most of the time is this story that we were 7 MEPs, 5 of them were women. We were the 5 really proactive, because the 2 others coming from extreme right groups, parties, they were in fact giving their salute to the Hungarian government, but the 5 others, we were really there to listen and to work. We were coming from the what would be called the left to the right wing of the government, the 5 big groups. My colleague from the right group is a Luxembourg Christian Democrat person, and the 5 of us were called for 3 days, crazy woman coming from the leftist liberals. And it was, for me, very interesting to see how much this plurality of opinion that it has ours, the democratic debate that we have in the parliament with all of these opinions, and we have different opinions with my colleague from Sweden, Malin Björk, coming from the left, my colleague Bettina Vollat coming from Social Democrats, me from the Greens, Isabel coming from Luxembourg and the Christian Democrats, and and it was Anna Donat from the Renew at the time, but my shadow is Ramona Strugario. We have a plurality of opinion, and what is interesting is this debate that we have and that creates good public policies coming from the European Parliament and make democracy live. And in the Hungarian context, we were just leftist liberals, and that doesn't mean anything, of course, and we were us against them. And we didn't talk, we talked about a lot of topics. We met a lot of people from all sorts of sectors, and we wanted to go deep in all sorts of topics. And the only thing that we were portrayed as were people only looking into the LGBTI issues, and of course with this nasty, stupid, caricatural comparison with pedophilia. So I was asked the question, do I want to not save the children of Hungary? And we were, of course, also shown as being foreign interference. And it was my job to say all the time, this is Europe. And I go to any member state of Europe, and you are Europe, and you are entitled, in fact, to have an official mission from the Parliament. You should be happy. This is our job. This is why you sent representative to the European Parliament. It is not, you are an outside country, and what we are doing here is illegitimate. We are European mission coming to one of our European member states, and we do that all the time. And then, of course, what I want also to strike is the fact that Fidesz has managed to take control of key institutions and more indeed in the academic world. And this is something that we need to work on more. So that's why also this report is so important. We know for a long time how the independence of judiciary and media, as well as checks and balance, has been dismantled, and that is extensively documented. But now we need to highlight the particularly worrying example of all of these public interest asset management foundation, and it is in the report, you've worked on this, which we heard about at the end of 2020, and see it as one of the focus of the report we're discussing today is very important, because we need to make aware the European member states of this, because this is European money. The fact that we will not have public scrutiny, transparency requirements, and a number of other things, we will not know what happens to this money, is one of the ways to work in the European sphere to try to prevent things. Because indeed, we manage in that way, for example, to prevent the RFF, the recovery funds, but we need to know more about it. It is still something that people have been are a bit aware of, but not enough. And how all of these foundation and transparency is not only keeping secret the channels of the money, but it is also maybe installing a second state. And even if Orban was not in power as from the 3rd of April, all of the Orban people will probably still be very much in power, and for a long time. We have seen in these last weeks people resigning just in time for change, and they go again for a mandate of 7 years, 9 years in one or another institution, and they will be there for a long time now. Third, I want to mention the Pegasus allegation. That was really my big surprise. I mean, I knew about Pegasus. I knew the fact that Hungary was the government that used it against its own people. I had not realized how much the Pegasus has been a turning point in fear and in censorship. The journalists and the activists we met said for them this was a change. They always knew that they were surveilled, but it was something to have it somewhere in your mind, far away, and then to really know that you are every day surveilled. This Pegasus, one journalist told me, I would always be very upset when people would compare Hungary to Russia. I thought it was outrageous. It wasn't exactly at all the same thing. And he said, honestly, since the Pegasus story, we went this autumn and Pegasus came out this summer. Since this summer, this journalist told me, I don't know anymore. I don't know where Hungary is relative to Russia. And it wasn't one of the most critic of the government, which told me. So what I would like to understand more today, and that's why I will be listening very, very seriously, is indeed more about how this money, this foundation is hiding a lot of things. What are the concrete consequences of the LGBTQ legislation? How much censorship it gives in publication today? What exactly does it mean? We made a lot of noise about this law. We know how dangerous it could be. Do you already see the effects of it? And then I wanted just to finish to say that, of course, we will go on working. We are in a moment of big worrisome, because no infringement procedures for the Commission for years, until the LGBTI legislation, the anti-LGBTIQ legislation, until the censorship of club radio. We were hoping to have more coming in. There were also the halt of the RFF money, and we were hoping to have the conditionality mechanism being activated. Now we know that with the Ukraine war, situation has changed. The council mood is not the same. My work is a work with my shadows. It is a work of very subtle convince, trying to get member states in the council to act, and it's very difficult for them. Very little are the ones that really are vocal. The others even vote but are not vocal, and we also need more votes if we want to get somewhere in the Article 7 process. And the Ukraine thing is a big worry, of course, because it is changing the mood. It's changing clearly the mood on Poland, and we don't know yet what will be the effects on the Hungarian situation. I would like to thank very much the academics to do this work, and all of those that today will speak, because what strikes me in Hungary is the extent of self-censorship. I do not meet this in other member states, even in Poland. It is so difficult in Hungary to get people to talk. So I know how much the fear is there, and it's everywhere in your body and your mind. And I know how courageous you are to work and to talk on this. We must encourage you to talk. We must tell you that we support you, and that's really what I hope that we will be also saying today and showing to you. And once again, your work is helping us very much. It is activists and journalists and academics today that are helping Hungary. It's not the member states, it's not the Commission. Hungarians are helping themselves at the moment, and for years. With the help of the Parliament, I think on this, the Parliament has always been on the right side, but you have been very lonely when it comes to help from Commission and from Council. We do hope that we can try to change that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and really, it's a big honor for us to have you here and listening you. Thank you so much, and thank you all your supports. You know very well, you will be more and more famous in Hungary. It's happened with the other colleagues the last 12 years, but I know it's very important work what you have to do for the Hungarian people, for the Hungarian democracy. So thank you indeed. It is true what you have said. And unfortunately, all your sentences were about the truth. Let's move forward, and I would like to give the floor to the authors. They're going to be present the report by themes. The first will be the strengthening of the authoritarian features of the Orbán regime. My daughter, sorry, of the authoritarian features of the Orbán regime rule by decree. And I would like to give the floor Mr. Zoltán Fleck, lawyer, sociologist, and a professor at the ELTE University, Budapest. Professor, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your interest, and thank you for the organizers also, because it's a really important task to summarize the Hungarian situation for European colleagues after 12 years of autocratic rule. Let me say something about the general background. I'm a sociologist and a lawyer, and I will have some sentences about the so-called legalist autocracy and its consequences to culture, education, and autonomies in general. Let me start with a legal case. Some months ago, a pro-government newspaper published an article in which it compared the book published by the Libraries Association to a pedophile and the association to a pedophile organization. According to the Budapest Court of Appeal, this doesn't harm the association's reputation. The court reasoned that the aim of the book could not have been to discredit the association, and that there was a link between homosexuality and pedophilia. The judge has used the arguments designed by state and party propagandists. It's the same arguments that in the party ideology. Meanwhile, a referendum on the protection of children will be held at the same time at the parliamentary elections with the following questions. Do you support the teaching of sexual orientation to minors in public education establishments without parental consent? Do you support the promotion of sex reassignment therapy for underage children? Do you support the unrestricted exposure of underage children to sexually explicit media content that may affect their development? And do you support the showing of sex change media content to minors? These are the questions of referendum. So Hungary now is not a rule of law state. It's quite clear. The ruling party has built a new autocracy as the member of the European Union, in the middle of the European Union. During the past 12 years, the executive, by the help of parliamentary supermajority, systematically eliminated all the checks over the government. There is no constitutional counterweight. The will of the head of the government prevails. The exercise of power is clearly arbitrary. Authoritarianism has a legal guardrabe. There are formal constitutional institutions, but their only function is to support the policies of the ruling party. This has two consequences. Firstly, even informed foreign experts have had difficulty, serious difficulty, perceiving the nature of the regime. And secondly, this institutional cheating could make democratic governance almost impossible in the event of a future oppositional victory. Constitutional judges, ombudsman, budgetary council, procurator general, national media council, and so on will change from the role of faking constitutionalism to breaking constitutionalism after the opposition's election victory. Orban is dangerous for European Union. He openly attacks common European values and gave fields for such war criminals as Putin. By now, the autocratic elements of governing have become visible. The natural dynamism of autocratic politics is the extension of arbitrariness. This regime, as an electoral autocracy, is well prepared for the case of losing the election. The preservation of political, economic, and cultural power is being carried out by new means. A number of state cultural institutions and the vast majority of Hungarian state universities have been placed under the management of public interest asset management foundations performing public tasks, with boards of trustees loyal to Fidesz. Institutions performing a public function and using central budgetary resources are thus placed under the control of a parallel state, and their operation becomes uncontrollable. The entrenched public loyalists and the deep state severely limit democracy. They can lose elections, but not power. There's hardly a more undemocratic political intention. In the 2 years since the last report, this intention has motivated events in the fields of culture, education, and politics. An institutional culture with weak autonomy cannot resist governmental pressure based on the following logic. It cannot remain an autonomous institution. Enforced loyalty is natural. Disproportionality of funding is an expression of political proximity. Active support for government ideology is always worthwhile. Critical voices have consequences. After the third electoral victory, Orbán started to recalibrate Hungarian cultural landscape according to his political aim. Based on its pragmatic Christian nationalism, aggressive pressures towards conservative family ideals and anti-gender ideology, and open ideological and legal attacks against sexual minorities, the government propaganda has used the core elements of extreme right populism, well known worldwide. The militant phraseology and discriminatory regulations further widened social and cultural gaps and caused severe harms to social integration. As in any autocratic regime, there is no policy considerations without the dominant aim. The dominant aim is the extension and retention of power. The best tool of this political aim is centralization, micromanagement by local loyalists, direct government control in every possible fields, eliminating all autonomies. The Hungarian new autocracy has used its constituent power, two-thirds majority, for concreting for a very long time, its ideological beliefs and especially the material sources. Institutions and personnel serves the process of dismantling democratic openness. Hungary is becoming a closing society. The expansion of autocracy has a monolith, very primitive logic. Culture, education, media, religion must serve the same political purpose. During the last 2 years, some new elements of the regime emerged. Governing by decree became commonplace, for which the epidemic situation was only a pretext. Another novelty is the amount and intensity of the privatization and expropriation of state assets and functions. The government has used the state of emergency imposed by the pandemic to divert resources from opposition municipalities without any limits to abolish university autonomy, while political expression rights were limited. In a situation of limited lobbying during the epidemic, the status of cultural workers as civil servants was abolished, and most municipal theaters were placed under the tutelage of supervisory boards appointed by the minister. So, as a summary, let me say two sentences about the logic of policymaking. So, in Hungary now, during these 12 years, there's no education policy, no cultural policy. There's only a sheer naked power politics. And this is the most tragic consequence of an autocratic legalism. No academic, no educational, and no cultural policy. The only logic is the sheer political interest. Thank you for your occasion to show something about the legal system, and let us show you some elements of the consequences. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Professor. And the next guest speaker is Gábor Polyák. lawyer, head of the Department of Media Studies at ELTE University, Budapest. And the topic is pro-government propaganda and hegemony in the media. And maybe, Gábor, you can mention what happened early today morning. It was an untypical morning because the opposition parties, together all the parties, got 5 minutes in the public media today morning. Maybe you can mention it. Gábor, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, if it is a news that one of the candidates of the prime ministry could get into the public media, then it is absolutely clear that the problem is huge. And as Zoltán mentioned, there were no public policies in the last 12 years in Hungary. Of course, in a professional term, there was no media policy. However, in a term of power, in a term of struggling for power, yeah, we could experience a very effective way of how to say, relaunching the media system. So there was a media policy, but without any democratic aim. It only aimed at having more and more space in the public sphere, and it was made really effective. Yeah, since 2020, the situation of the media, it could be worse. However, let me begin with the critics against the European Commission, as we could hear the Hungarian civil society, Hungarian academics did not get a huge help from the European Commission. And in the case of the media, it is a really clear situation because there are 3 complaints before the European Commission that could, if not solve the whole of the problems, but make the situation much better regarding the media freedom. From 2 of these 3 complaints are based on state aid, on competition law, very clear situation. One of that is regarding the funding of the state media, funding of the public media, where the rules of the European Commission are really clear, and the complaint is on the desk of the European Commission since 2016. The other state aid complaint was formulated regarding the using of public money as state advertisement. Again, I think it is really clear situation that was submitted in 2019. Neither of these complaints could be finished by the Commission. And that, as I said, both of these could really improve the situation of the media freedom. And these are not new procedures. These are not rule of law complaints. These are clearly competition law complaints that should be and could be solved by the European Commission. And the third one is about the harmonization of the Audiovisual Media Services Directive that contains some rules about the independence of the media authority. Most of them are quite formal, that are also fulfilled in the in the Hungarian media law. However, there is one rule in the directive that could be used for showing that the Hungarian Media Council is not independent. The decision is again in the hand of the European Commission, why and how they want to decide. So as a leader of an NGO and an academic dealing with media freedom, I really feel that the European Commission could do much more for having a better situation in media freedom. The patterns in the developments of the last 2 years are very similar to the patterns what we experienced after 2010. And the main goal was the occupation of new part of the media system by the ruling party. 2010, that was the year when the largest news portal, index.hu, was completely occupied, controlled by the Fidesz. And we lost our biggest independent news source. the good news is that the journalists of Index could launch a new project. This is the well-known telex.hu. However, the popularity of Index is much higher and will remain much higher than the popularity of telex, even if the importance of telex in the field of information very high, but it cannot reach the same amount of people, the same audience that Index can reach still. During the pandemic, the access of information was also significantly more difficult than before. It was almost impossible to get any information from the government about the real situation. No questions coming from the independent journalist was answered by the government. Also, the requests for public data, they were almost stopped. The deadline for giving answer was extended for in some 90 days. That meant that it was really impossible to get any information about the real situation. That was also a big European debate, criminal law with a completely unclear content, which the government supposedly wanted to fight fake news. It increased the risk for journalists and information providers, even if no criminal proceedings against journalists had been brought so far. But it is available. This law can be used, can be applied anytime. And the chilling effect is very high, not mainly on the journalists, but on the information providers, let's say the doctors, the teachers who were asked about the situation and who were not ready to answer the questions of the journalists. The mentioned homophobic law adopted in 2021 also affects the media. LGBTQ content is only allowed in the late night time slot. And as we experience, there was a huge demand for having such kind of regulation because there are several complaints to the Media Council. I have to say that the Media Council tried to interpret this kind of law very strictly, and we cannot see very strong sanctions against media providers. But again, because if it is absolutely unclear and because it can be applied anytime, there is no guarantee that in the future it will be not misused. 2021, it was mentioned, it was revealed that the government had been surveying independent journalists and media outlets with Pegasus spy software. I think that there were several points when we could say that this is the end of the rule of law. Pegasus case, that was really the end of the rule of law. That was the case when uncontrolled anyone could be surveyed by the government, and we are speaking about independent journalists doing their job very well, publishing very important investigative articles. They were in the focus, in the target of the government using this spy software. And it is also important to know that the surveillance scandal did not have any legal consequences within Hungary because the Hungarian law essentially allows anyone to be surveyed. So we cannot do anything against the situation. And there is a decision of the European Court of Human Rights that stated that the Hungarian regulation is not in line with the European human rights standards. The government and the parliament hasn't changed the law. Nothing happened at European level. We are at the state media now. The bias of the state media is clearly visible in the election campaign. No opposition figures are allowed to appear in talk shows, but even in news programs, facts and opinions are mixed up, and the narrative of the ruling party are not leading. This is the only narrative that you can have from the public media. And what István mentioned, this is a new development. The public media decided to give 5 minutes for all of the opposition lists, opposition candidates, or opposition organizations. And that made possible for Peter Markizoy to get into the studio of the public media. I have to say I couldn't see the show, but I'm afraid that it was not enough to discuss really the situation of Hungary and the program of the opposition. And the state media to this day allow room for interpretations of the Ukrainian war that follow the Russian narrative. I thought that it was the failure of the first days, but no, last week you could also watch television programs in the that delivered the narrative of the Russian interpretation of this war. In recent weeks, it has emerged that the state media news agency is receiving ready-made news from the government and even from pro-government businessmen. The documents that have been cut out show a very strong self-censorship in the state news agency. So we have only one news agency. It is part of the state media, and they get emails with the formulation of the news, but they have to publish without any change. And even if the journalists want to publish anything what is not in line with the view of the government, the self-censorship is very strong, and it is impossible to publish any news that could be somehow interpreted as critics against the decisions of the government. Not only against the government, but also against the partners of the government. The political control of infrastructure such as newspaper distribution and broadcasting has continued spectacularly. So it is not only about the occupying of the media outlets, but also about the occupation of the additional infrastructure. Even if we will have a change in the government, the broadcasting of the free television programs will remain in the hand of Fidesz oligarchs. So it is a very big challenge to change this situation, and not only because of the market situation, which is also very problematic, but also because the regulation of the media is binded to 2/3 majority rules. So we have to have some very smart solutions, but we cannot solve all of the problems in a short time after a possible change. So thank you. That was what I tried to summarize for you. And I have to say that I'm sorry I cannot stay here. I have a program with my colleagues now. But if you have any question about the media, you can reach me in mail or through the editors of the book. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gábor. And the next speaker is Professor Ágnes Kövér, who is a lawyer, sociologist, and associate professor at the University Budapest. And she will talk about the gender policy of the Orbán regime. Professor Kövér, the floor is yours. I hope you are here. Are you available?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, thank you.
Myself. Thank you very much. And I would start with saying that Hungary is an autocracy, but it is a classic patriarchal autocracy. Its gender policy is twofold. One line intends to recreate a traditional epoch in which women know their place in society as saviors of the dwindling nation, providing care, carrying extra burdens. The other line of policies strives to abolish and make invisible the part of society whose sexual and gender identity differs from the rules of the gender order they permit. The women's policy of the System of National Cooperation, NER, has unfolded over the last decade in a deceptive way. On the surface, it may seem to implement the aspirations of feminism, mainly cultural feminism, as it incorporates some feminist concepts and demands for a women's movement into its rhetoric. However, its real purpose and operation runs counter to the goals of emancipation, favors only demographic considerations, and reinforces the subordination of women, creating the image of a society which favors male domination. The NER policies for women are based on the presumption and the fear of, in quotation, extinction of the nation, quotation closed. These policies are not primarily about women, but are in actuality demographic in nature and consequently aimed at the regulation of families. But family is only considered to exist where, in quotation, the mother is the woman and the father is the man, quotation closed, where the traditional caring, serving role of women is self-evident. The NER seeks to influence the selective growth of the population through a genus-based state regulation. On the one hand, it encourages the birth of more children, preferably middle class, by providing diverse support to families in employment. On the other hand, it keeps vital universal benefits for the poorest families with children at extremely low level. The discourse and practice of gender equality, like the concept of gender, has become the subject of witch hunts and stands as a leading issue in opposing the European Union. As an example, in 2018, the master's program in gender studies was deleted from the training offer of Hungarian universities, totally disregarding university autonomy. At the same time, the discourse and policy of gender equality was abolished. Although public policy supports and even expects women to take up employment, but for instance, by linking substantial family benefits to participation in the labor market, in the absence of equality policies, an increasing proportion of women workers are trapped in humiliating underpaid jobs and often in public employment. Women are under double exploitation. They have to carry out their unpaid domestic and caring responsibilities, and mostly because of monetary constraints, participate in gainful employment, while neither the structural conditions nor the values of gender equality in the labor market support them. We all know about the pay gap in Hungary. It is 16% difference between women and men earnings. And we know about the pension gap as well. It is about 10% in favor of men. This pension gap is even higher in case of the Women 40 measure, where women can retire after 40 years of service or even after 32 years, depending on the number of their children. It makes a huge difference in the pension. The NER's growing maternalistic, natalist, exclusionary, anti-gender and anti-sexual minorities policies unfolded during 3 cycles, in which one of the peak manifestations occurred when the Orbán parliament voted down the ratification of the Istanbul Convention in 2020. The other line of Orbán's gender order runs parallel with the withering of equality discourse and the disappearing of rights-based governing by targeting sexual and gender minorities. Let's see what happened with some examples. We have heard about that so far. Fidesz started restricting the fundamental rights of LGBTQI people as soon as it came to power in 2010. As a first step, the Basic Law banned marriage between same-sex couples in 2011, and 2 years later, it was also enshrined in the Basic Law that marriage constituted the foundation for the family. Therefore, same-sex couples in civil partnership were excluded from the concept of family. Since the system generates its identity by creating enemies and labeling more and more social groups as enemies, obviously otherness, especially sexual difference, is a well-given target. The LGBTQI minority came into focus again in 2019 when the government launched a propaganda campaign against them. The attack persisted even during the pandemic, when the executive power was disproportionately strengthened by the exceptional legal order, and was used by the government not only to deal with the epidemic, but also to shrink LGBTQI rights. Emergency legislation, for example, has curtailed the right of transgender people to change their name. By amending the Registry Act, the original concept of sex was replaced by birth sex, which cannot be legally changed. This targeted the administrative disappearance of a group that is considered undesirable. And we have mentioned so many times so far that law, which was passed by the Parliament in June 2021, by adopting the fight against pedophilia, the law actually aimed at the fight against pedophilia in protection of children, which restricting the activities of NGOs in educational institutions to raise awareness of the LGBTQI phenomenon, and restricting the availability of LGBTQ plus content in media and films to people under 18. The pro-government media portrayed experts and human rights activists who opposed the law as supporters of pedophilia. Thus, the law made out LGBTQI as if it fell under the umbrella of pedophilia. And one last sentence about the recent development when a woman was actually elected to be the head of the state. I think this is a very eye-catching move, but this does not it is not based on the result of any women's movement or the outcome of women's equal participation in politics and decision-making, or maybe in economic life. This is only serve a short-term political interest, which actually a classic example of the phenomenon of tokenism. Thank you very much. I'm very happy for presenting.
Thank you so much, Professor. And I would like to give the floor now to Professor Dóra Györfi, economist, professor. Her topic is outsourcing of public universities to foundations, and it's very, very serious topic. We thought we had to speak about that. So, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It is a great honor to be here and introduce the report. In this brief presentation, I will talk about the new types of foundations which have been created in Hungarian higher education and culture to ensure the lasting influence of the current government in the spheres, even in the event of an election loss. I will mainly focus on universities. A novel development since the publication of the first report in 2020 is the proliferation of these new types of foundations called public interest asset management foundations performing public tasks, or PACVAs as written in the report, which outsource public assets from state supervision with the aim to place entire sectors under the control of profit-less management for the long term. Around 2.6 billion euro was transferred to these foundations from public wealth, including immovable assets such as buildings and company shares. 2/3 of the foundations were established in the field of higher education. This transformation has impacted 4/5 of Hungarian public universities. Today, only 3 significant state-owned universities remain in Hungary, 2 minor arts universities and a college. In September 2021, 70% of Hungarian students started their academic year in a private university, in contrast to 15% in 2018. The boards of trustees of these foundations are largely composed of officials loyal to Fidesz. Many of them are or were members or senior officials of the current government. The boards are authorized to exercise founding rights, thus future governments cannot change their composition. At the same time, the government also made a long-term commitment to finance the operation of these foundations from the central budget. This implies that while foundations are governed by private law, they are still financed from taxpayers' money without the ability of the government to exercise control over their operations. This is the exact opposite of the endowment model which exists in the US, for example. There, endowments are created to attract private wealth for public purposes, while here, public wealth is withdrawn from state control for private purposes. The most important consequence of the model change concerns the autonomy of universities and academic freedom. While the government argues that being independent from the state increases institutional autonomy, only the board of trustees is truly autonomous. The board members are not elected, and the universities themselves could not influence their selection at all. At the same time, several fundamental rights, which serve as the basis of university autonomy, are shifted away from university senates to the board. The most important such rights include the right to create the organizational and operational rules of the institution and the right to elect the rector candidate. In this context, the university cannot be regarded as autonomous at all, since its self-government body can only decide in cases of little importance. This transformation was carried out without a public debate. The government used all possible means to hasten the transformation process and fully exploited the possibilities arising from the pandemic situation. Legislation was simplified, and the possibilities for protest were considerably narrowed. Most universities passively accepted the changes, which was facilitated by the prospect of a pay rise. There was also a promise of a large-scale development program based on a loan from the European Recovery and Resilience Facility. The government called for university tenders for more than 2.6 billion euros to achieve the goals. Eventually, the Hungarian government backed out of the loan agreement, though they pledged to provide the necessary amounts from other resources. Resistance to the transformation proved to be futile. A unified and lasting opposition was shown by the University of Theatre and Film Arts, SFE, where the objective of outsourcing universities to foundations merged with the governmental Kulturkampf, the replacement of the cultural elite. In the spring of 2020, after the plans for model change were published, the university leaders fought unsuccessfully to negotiate on the proposed changes, and the parliament accepted the legislation during the summer. Afterwards, the university leadership resigned, most teachers went on strike, and the students occupied the university for 71 days to keep the members of the board out. The blockade was terminated only with the worsening pandemic situation. As the new board took over the buildings, almost half of the active students left the university, and 1/3 of the professors also resigned. During this transformation process, a 115-year-old university tradition, which fundamentally shaped Hungarian national culture, was shattered. The establishment of foundations do not only impact existing universities, but there are new initiatives as well, which receive enormous amount of public money for special governmental objectives. One such institution is the Matthias Corvinus Collegium, which went from a small higher education student house providing educational and talent management services to a large institution which is responsible for the education of a new right-wing Orbán loyalist intellectual elite and provides a platform in Hungary for international right and far-right figures, such as Tucker Carlson, who was invited there last summer. This institution received around 1.5 billion euro public wealth, which is around the annual budget of the entire higher education sector. The government has been similarly generous with the plans of establishment of the Budapest campus for the Chinese Fudan University. According to the plans, Hungary will finance from Chinese loans and the central budget a 1.6 billion euro campus built by a Chinese construction company on a parcel next to the Danube, given free of charge. The new university will be managed and owned by a foundation, as the government will have no influence on a university financed entirely by Hungarian taxpayers. The Chinese did not even guarantee covering the operational costs of the institution. This project stands in sharp contrast with the expulsion of Central European University, which was built from private funds and had US accreditation. The Fudan project is highly disadvantageous to Hungary and reflects the change in the geopolitical orientation of the Orbán government. During January this year, the Hungarian opposition collected the necessary signatures to have a referendum on this highly unpopular project. While public wealth is transferred into these new types of foundations, and the government has clearly focused on policies to transform the entire Hungarian higher education sector, the regular indicators of this field are disheartening. The number of applicants to undergraduate programs fell from 90,000 in 2019 to 77,000 in 2021, while the number of admitted fell from 66,000 to 60,000. During the past decade, Hungary has been unable to increase the share of population with a tertiary degree in the 25-34-year-old age group. Only 30% of this group graduates, which is well below the 40% EU average and among the lowest in Europe and among the OECD countries. This has severe implications for Hungarian competitiveness. It is contrary to Hungarian national interest as well as European trends and aspirations. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much indeed. And last but not least, the next speaker is Professor Anna Gács, literary critic, associate professor, Budapest University of Technology. And the topic is escalation of the culture camp. Dear Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for being curious about our report and what's going on in Hungary. So in my presentation, I want to speak about three aspects of the cultural scene. First is the cultural scene as the scene of escalating cultural warfare. Number two is culture as the scene of indoctrination. And number three is culture as the scene of economic and political transactions aiming to solidify Orbán's power and extend it beyond the next elections, regardless of their results. So I'm not going to break down these tendencies to different spheres of arts and culture. I'd rather like to point out some of the most important directions and give you a few examples to understand what's going on or what's been going on in the past 2 years in the cultural sphere. So number one, what do we mean when we say in this report that the cultural warfare is escalating? The first thing we mean is ideological war. After his won in 2018, Orbán announced a new era in culture, referring to everyday culture as well as popular culture and elite culture. The ideological framework for this new era was developed and explained by right-wing pro-government journalists, ideologists who envisioned a cultural war between nation states on the one hand and international left liberal forces on the other, who try to undermine traditional values. They called for a unified conservative Hungarian cultural policy and depicted culture as a battlefield where no lenience is allowed on the government side. So these initiatives are mirrored in the direct intervention into the agendas of national institutions, mainly memory institutions. A most recent example is an exhibition which is supposed to be about the Hungarian Middle Ages, celebrating the anniversary of an 800-year-old legal document. This exhibition has been prepared for 4 years in the National Museum. And in last December, the Minister of Human Resources appointed new curators and fired others to avert the ideological direction of this exhibition. This was an act which was heavily criticized by scholars and led to the resignation of some of the researchers who drew their book chapters in the exhibition publication. Cultural warfare also means the replacement of the old elite. This is done by several different means, for example, by overfunding of cultural institutions and organizations in line with the government's nationalist agenda, the massive lack of funding for oppositional and independent organizations, on the other hand, associations, journals, and so on and so forth, individual artists as well, which has led to the perishing of some old organizations, such as the Association of Young Writers. The punishing of opposition-led municipalities is also part of this game, because these municipalities could act as alternative scenes for independent art, independent culture, yet because of the lack of financial resources, they are not able to play this role. Besides financial intervention, we are also talking about administrative and legal intervention. For example, the extension of central control over formerly municipality-run theaters and other institutions. Cultural warfare also means appreciating loyalty over quality or professional achievement. For example, when appointing new directors and allocating financial resources to cultural projects. The very telling example I want to give you here is the appointment of the new director of the Natural History Museum, who is a person with no academic achievement whatsoever, but a very strong determination to put the focus on national anthropology in the museum future projects, whatever national anthropology means. So number 2 is culture as the scene of indoctrination. Orban's government's long-term strategy is to use culture, just like education and media, to shape consciousness and guarantee a long-term popularity of illiberal political initiatives. This is done through popular culture. The role of popular culture should not be underestimated in this endeavor. We tend to speak about elite culture when we mention culture, but of course, popular culture has more access to most people. So for example, pop music is used by the government to spread conservative, often extreme ideology, and to push pro-government messages, often quite directly. The indoctrination is also secured by legal intervention. Some of this has been mentioned already. For example, the legal persecution of sexual minorities takes its toll on access to and the market position of certain cultural contents, certain cultural products. And number 3 is culture as the scene of preserving power. So from this point of view, and this is what Zoltán Fleck mentioned in his remarks, so from this point of view, the ideological battle seems to be a cover for privatizing public assets and constructing a system of institutions that sustain Orban's power and influence in the long run. It is quite obvious that what is at stake for Orbán is not simply or not mainly to secure a long-term right-wing cultural hegemony, but also to put his hands on public assets, to put it very simply. So I think everyone mentioned these new types, or this new type of public asset management foundations or funds. They've emerged in the field of culture as well. For example, the Foundation for Hungarian Culture, which was established in April 2021, manages assets from old castles to new real estate developments and so on and so forth. With the value, the value of it is very difficult to estimate, but no doubt we are talking about several 10 millions of euros. Preserving power is also carried out through very powerful individuals who act as new power centers. The pattern is that they are appointed to a certain position and then they start to act as magnets, attracting several functions. They have no clear place in administrative hierarchy. They are commissioners with very vague portfolios, and no one really knows who they report to. One example here is this literary superman we mentioned in the report, who was appointed as the director of the main literary museum without any previous professional achievement in these fields, neither in literature nor in museums. But his stance was made clear when he said, I quote, "I am an extreme Orbanist. I supported the government policy to 110%. The same year, he was appointed to be a ministerial commissioner responsible for the integrated development of the National Library, the Hungarian publishing industry, the public literary collections. 1 year later, he became the ministerial commissioner for the coordination and nationalization of Hungarian popular music. And last year, he was also appointed as the head of the Foundation for Hungarian Culture, the foundation I've just mentioned. So these policies have diverse and far-reaching consequences, obviously. To mention but a few, a decline in professionalism in all fields of culture, the ever-growing lack of transparency, the unsure fate of national assets, including heritage scenes, the normalization of illiberalism in everyday perception, and of course, a very poor condition for independent quality professional work in the arts and humanities, the exhaustion of individuals who are determined to oppose this system and maintain the professional level of their work. Gwendolyn mentioned self-censorship in her opening remarks. I would rather say that these reactions are not directed by fear, rather despair, which is caused by the lack of effect, the lack of response, which also points to the importance of international networks, international support, and international funding. So thank you very much for your attention and care.
Thank you so much, and dear speakers, guest speakers, professors, thank you very much for all of you to present this paper. And now we would like to go to the Hungarian politicians of the European Parliament. First of all, I would like to give the floor to MEP Katalin Cseh, and I asked Katka to have the very important moderator job because I have one thing what I have to do with my small 2-year-old son, and I don't want to share it with you, so I have to go out. So thank you so much. Katka, the floor is yours, and please be the moderator after that.
Thank you very much, István, and great to see a man tending to his fatherly duties. I'm not sure what the patriarchal Fidesz politicians would say to that about the gender roles, but I hope that all goes well on your side. And also, let me thank all our speakers for the amazing document and also for the presentation. And I believe it's very interesting for us to have this conversation, particularly today in these very historic times. I feel that even though all attention is on Ukraine in these days, the problems that have been going on there really put even more focus on the issues that we were discussing also today, and that what we were highlighting as Hungarian activists and advocates and academics for a decade now. I was in Ukraine just a couple of days ago, and I was talking to the people who were soon about to hit by the war front. I really have this feeling that history is certainly not over. Of course, we all wish to live in much more peaceful times, but these are historic moments that will decide the future of the world, the future of the EU, and individuals just like you who work in Hungary on these issues are the very exact shapers of this future. Because I want to stress that when we talk about the political situation in Hungary, we are not only discussing internal issues, we are actually discussing the future of Europe. Because in the past couple of days, it has become very clear that the real dividing line is not between the traditional political camps, it's not between the left and the right, but between democracies and autocracies. And of course, Hungary right now is not a dictatorship in the sense that Russia is. This is particularly true in light that we are having elections on April the 3rd, where it is very possible, very likely that the opposition actually has a chance of defeating Mr. Orbán. But also, I cannot say that everything is well there. As we heard from many speakers, and I hope that more and more European decision makers realize this, Hungary is absolutely not a full democracy either. The question is whether we let Europe be taken over by the populists, by the corrupted people, by the agents of autocrats, or we fight back as a union. And this report clearly shows how a country moves from democracy towards autocracy. It shows a very good roadmap. And I wish all of my MEP colleagues would read this report, because it is very important to know. Because this is how the autocratic footprint infiltrates our union. Mr. Orbán himself has very clearly adopted some policies from Putin's Russia. And it's important to note, particularly in these times. For example, what was mentioned also before, the Hungarian very infamous anti-LGBT law that bans the educational work or the scientific dialogue or even the display of homosexuality is 100% based on the Russian model. The homophobic state-funded campaigns, the state-funded anti-immigrant campaigns, the promotion of the so-called conservative values, which are turning against anybody who does not fit into the traditional family model, are very clear characteristics of the authoritarian regimes. And just like in Russia, these legislations are happening because they need to divert attention from corruption, from governance failures, and Orbán is following the Putin footstep. Campaigning against the most vulnerable is a very ideal way to do this. And what's worse, and what is really the tragedy, and it was very painful for me to be reminded again and again, and also in this this presentation, that these power tools are very clearly infiltrating education. It is appalling to see the pseudoscience, the fake statements in the Hungarian state-approved textbooks. It is
Thank you very much, Katka. Let me welcome everyone. It's very important that this event is back, and it's particularly symbolic that it's happening today. Because today teachers across the country are on strike for their rights, for their opportunities, for their conditions, but above all, for the next generation. In itself, it's a pity that in the company of great intellectuals, we cannot attend some kind of professional discussions or lectures, but we have to hear and speak about the country's cry for help. It's unfortunate, but it's extremely important, I think. It was also said that the previous conference, where Orbán's terrible policies of hate speech, intimidation, and populism have led, but perhaps these comments and concerns have taken on even greater significance than before a few days ago. We have a despot who is eliminating critical voices, who is prosecuting intellectuals, his opposition, and minorities, who is making his people vulnerable and dependent in order to roll over them. He's a corrupt politician who wants everything for himself. Then his greed drives him further mad. I have said the above about Putin, but it's not difficult to substitute others, since I could have said them about Viktor Orbán. The worries, the cries for help, and that we hear and that we ourselves are uttering are not in vain. They are not groundless. We see a tragedy that is happening at the borders of Europe in Ukraine. Populism, hatred has led us to this what is happening nowadays. That is why Europe must be strong and persistent in the face of those who degrade European values. They must be resisted. Their machinery must be prevented from being financed by European funds, and all those efforts must be supported, which seek to keep Hungary in the European path, the European way. So all in all, because there are a lot of speakers, I would like to thank you for your excellent work and for this presentation. And so I would like to thank you for all the speakers and listeners for taking on this mission. From here, I would like to also welcome the strikers today. And now, Katka, I would like to give the floor back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sándor, for your kind words. And indeed, it's very important to stress that as we speak, teachers are rising up for better working conditions and for the future of our kids. So yes, very big appreciation to them also from my side. Now let me give the floor for closing remarks to my colleague Martin Gyöngyi, who represents the Jobbik Party in the European Parliament. Martin, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Katka, and it's my great pleasure to be here today and to have this discussion with our renowned experts and my colleague MEPs. Thank you very much for giving yet again a very accurate description of what exactly is happening in Hungary, what the situation is like in Hungary. Unfortunately, in just about a few weeks, this is my second opportunity to talk in a conference or take part in a panel discussion where renowned international institutions and experts attempt to explain to the broader public what exactly is going on in Hungary. This conference that I'm referring to was the introduction of the Black Book of Corruption, which was a few weeks ago. The English version was introduced here in Brussels by Transparency International Hungary and Civitas Institute, and they were basically saying that corruption is everywhere, but what differentiates Hungary from every other country in the European Union or elsewhere is that in Hungary, corruption is systemic. It's part of the way things work in Hungary. That's what the regime is built upon. That's one of the main features of the regime of Viktor Orbán. Now, the problem in Hungary, as we have found out from our experts, is that Hungary is a unique, exceptional, it's one of its kind. Illiberalism is present elsewhere also, but Orbán has created something in Hungary which plays in a different league. My Hungarian colleagues will know what I refer to when I say it's a Hungaricum. It is something which is very, very unique to Hungary. And I would argue with some with some of you who have said that Hungary is not a dictatorship. Well, labeling it, we do have still some problems as to how we should name this regime or this system. The reason why it's a bit different from Putin's Russia is that well, we are still allowed to speak our mind, and we still have institutions which look democratic. So the facade and the surface, it's still that of a democracy. But if you scratch the surface and you peer a bit underneath, you realize that the system is rotten to the core. And this is why This is why I would say that labeling it a hybrid regime is probably the closest to the truth, but the tendency is extremely worrying. Of course, we have illiberalism elsewhere. In the United States, we have experienced the Trump era, but it was limited by long-established structures, checks and balances, and the long-standing constitution. In Poland, I know many people draw parallels between Hungary and Poland. In Poland, there is a coalition government. It's not centered around a single individual. Corruption is, I'm sure it's present in Poland. I don't know of any corruption scandals, but I'm sure it is present, but it is not systemic. It's not the main feature of the government or the regime in Poland. Media freedom, although limited, still exists to some extent. And I think in Poland you can still speak of some civil service, which in Hungary, the civil service has also been taken over completely by the party and by Viktor Orban. And yes, Gwendolyn has also pointed out that self-censorship is something which is very much present in Hungary. And in this regard, it is very different from everything else we know, or every other examples that we know. So under Orban, it has become true in Hungary that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we have to stop Viktor Orban, because we can see that it is a dangerous spiral in which Hungary can become a full-fledged dictatorship. If we look at Russia, or we look at some other historic examples from the 20th century, then we can see how these regimes can spiral or escalate into a very dangerous direction. Now, Viktor Orban's, the way he functions and the way this regime is built up, does have some enormous threats and some enormous dangers for the West, for the European Union. For example, it is an illiberal example for others, and it can distract and undermine the EU. We have seen many, many examples of that in the past couple of years. And for Hungary, it can block the country's Western integration, and there is an imminent danger of Huxit, which Viktor Orban and some of his closest associates openly speak about. So what can be done about this? I think there is an illusion nurtured by some at home and abroad that the European Union has the capacity and has the capability and the will to remove and crush this regime. I would argue with that, and I don't think it would do any good. It would only play into the hands of Viktor Orban, who is looking for every occasion to say that there is a foreign interference in Hungary. No, the change has to come from within. But what the EU can do is to develop a strategy to counter the trend of illiberalism, study Hungary and Viktor Orban very closely, and counter the very dangerous and destructive narrative of Viktor Orban. Because let's be clear, Viktor Orban throughout the last decade has developed an extremely successful narrative, which is very much targeted at the psychology and the psyche of the Hungarian society, which has been basically experiencing 30 years of mismanagement. In Hungary, corruption, for instance, we are always waiting for the moment when Hungarian society rises up against corruption. Well, in a country where our economy, that as we know it today, has been basically born in sin through redistribution, through mafia-style privatization and liberalization, in this country, unfortunately, throughout 30 years, people have gotten used to or immune to corruption. Of course, there has been some bias in media before. So now Viktor Orbán's narrative is that after decades of a left liberal dominance in the media, now he's taking over and he's giving a conservative and right-wing, in some instances, ultra-right-wing narrative. Which is, of course, it's not. I mean, this is not conservatism and this is not right-wing ideology in any shape or form that Viktor Orbán is putting forward. And in foreign policy, he's talking about pragmatism, raison d'etat, instead of value-based democratic norms and values. So to conclude, I think the solution is to develop a counter-narrative against illiberalism. It is not only useful in the case of Hungary, but it is useful also elsewhere. I think the United States also has the experience, so we have great scope for cooperation in that regard. But also within the EU, I think we have experienced the danger of illiberalism and illiberal autocratic regimes, so we can in cooperation develop this counter narrative. One thing is very clear: appeasement to keep unity of our long cherished institutions is not the way forward. In this dilemma of stability, unity versus values, I would very much encourage the European institutions and all our colleagues in the European Parliament, which is very outspoken and probably the driving force in this battle, to stand on the side of values, protect it, and point it out that what Viktor Orbán is doing is a false narrative, which is not only damaging the European Union, but it is first and foremost damaging the Hungarian society and Hungary as a country and Hungary's future as a country, as a Western country. So thank you very much. That was my concluding remark. And once again, I'm very grateful for being here. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Martin. And now, as a closing remark, let me give the floor to my great colleague, Rosa Thun, representing the Polska 2050 party in the Renew Europe group. Rosa, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Hatka. Thank you all. This was really fascinating, impressive presentations, as depressive, frankly speaking, because as it was mentioned, the Polish government follows the traces or follows the example of the successful, unfortunately, work of Viktor Orbán, and similarities are extremely strong and very evident, and that's why exactly I think I agree very much with all those who underline that weakening democracy and all our rights and values, everything that we struggled for over decades and achieved it in our part of Europe, weakening this is of course weakening the whole of European Union. So responsibility really is on our shoulders, Hungarian, Polish, and those who go in the direction of dictatorships, because we weaken the whole construction. And of course, the European Commission should react faster. We should work on it together, Hungarian and Polish members of European Parliament, to put pressure on the European Commission that they react faster. But of course, it's directly our responsibility what will happen. That's why I keep my fingers crossed for your upcoming elections. You must win those elections. It's important for you as much as for myself and for the whole of Europe. But what I want to say, I am persuaded, and we know, that Viktor Orbán surely has very close contacts with governments like the Polish one. Now we see that it's also Janša who went now to Kyiv. And I wonder if we have enough contacts on our level, experts, politicians in the opposition. We must cooperate closely, exchange those experiences and knowledge, also to know what they plan, how they destroy our remains, rests of of the democratic state, development of culture and education, and all those dramatic examples that were here presented. So after this presentation, thank you again really very much. I didn't read the report, but now I am persuaded I have to find time and read it. After this, listening to you, I am persuaded that we must not only work very closely together on the level of the European Parliament, but also parties in the opposition. I know that Donald Tusk came to Budapest for your huge demonstration, and very good so. But also civil society and scientists and experts. We need a very close exchange, and we need a stronger links that makes a stronger Europe that together struggles for the values that were mentioned and about which we spoke, because the coalition of those who want to destroy this Europe, as you know, is coming to existence, or they try to build it without very much success. And the last thing, there is a light in the tunnel, because you know probably about the last visit of the head of states, Czech, Slovenian and Polish, who went to Kyiv, but they didn't take Orban with him. So maybe there is, the coalition is not as strong as we fear that it might be. Here I must brutally finish, because I am joining another discussion which is almost as important as this one. Thank you very much wholeheartedly. Goodbye.
Thank you, Rosa. And once again, from my side, big thanks and congratulations for all the authors of this document, for all our speakers, and of course, those who followed through with us during these very exciting meetings. I wish you a very nice day, and thank you very much for participating. And as it was mentioned in the chat, the recording will be available later on the Facebook page and the website of OHA, that I really recommend all of you to follow. And also on YouTube, you can access this panel that we had today. And then I would just like to recommend you once again to read the document, learn from it, and let's work for a Europe where democracy is universal in every single country, and where we can stop the democratic backsliding in unison, being aware of the dangers it can withhold. Thank you very much for this, and have a very good day. Bye.